Hello, everyone. This is a Bloomberg Opinion election live stream. I'm Therese Raphael. We've been doing these chats to focus on the UK election for a few weeks, which is just a little over 2 weeks to run. And Bloomberg Opinion columnist Marcus Ashworth is again here with us to talk about that. But of course, Rishi Sunak was not the only leader who surprised people by calling an election from a position of weakness. Emmanuel Macron's announcement that he is dissolving the French parliament surely ranks as the political shock of the year. So I'm very pleased that we also have our Paris-based columnist Lionel Laurent with us today. Welcome, Lionel. So let's get started. And maybe let's start with France. Lionel, you wrote recently in a very well-read article on the Terminal that Macron's decision to call this election is a gambit worthy of Brexit. Doesn't look good for Macron. Talk to us about where the parties stand, the blocks that are leading stand in this election, and what are the scenarios that are most probable as an outcome here?
Sure. So we've gone from the kind of Brexit gamble to the Rishi Sunakification of Macron in about a week. Initially, we thought this would be a binary choice, essentially a two-horse race between Macron and Le Pen, who was clearly in the lead. Since then, the left have gotten their act together, which is a historically rare occasion, but the left have gotten together and formed a bloc that runs a very wide ideological rainbow from the far left, really hard anti-capitalist parties to the Social Democrats. And so they are now in second position. And the French electoral system is first past the post, but it has 2 rounds. It has a runoff vote. So Macron is now looking like the third candidate, again, a bit like Sunak, facing a real electoral humiliation. So we have Le Pen's bloc top with well over 30%, the left bloc not far behind in the high 20s, and Macron below 20. So basically, I mean, I was just at this defense summit, summit like a big arms industry show. And, you know, Bardella, Prime Minister in waiting, Marine Le Pen's number 2, was kind of walking through and holding court with a gaggle of journalists around him. That should tell you all you need to know about how he is the man to beat. And so the expected scenario is basically a relative majority led by Le Pen's party, or even an absolute majority if, as I said, this runoff system leads to a lot more, let's say, unpalatable choices where voters have to choose between the far right and the far left. So right now we're still expecting a gridlock parliament, but with Le Pen's party leading.
Yeah, it's really quite extraordinary. I was remembering that, you know, was it 20 years ago when there were protests against Le Pen Senior, Jean-Marie Le Pen, and there were more than 1 million people out in the street protesting the far right in France, and so few now. You know, it's just really shows how much that party has become mainstream. And from what you're saying, it seems no matter what happens, we see Macron substantially weakened and the National Rally with a great deal more power. And, you know, we saw last week pretty quickly that the market's not panicking, but not exactly pleased about this outcome. If we can look at, you know, one sign of that was the widening spread between French and German 10-year bonds. So I think we've got a chart with that that we can put up, I think, maybe. Yep.
That's the wider chart.
That's a different chart. Okay, that's fine. So this speaks to the not panicking point. Marcus, you can tell us what we're seeing here.
Yeah, I mean, the point here is that obviously Le Pen's party at some point they've sort of renounced their view. They were talking about Frexit, as in France potentially leaving, you know, the bedrock of the European Union, and I don't think we're talking that at all. And this chart here shows that obviously the post-global financial crisis into the euro crisis meltdowns, and a little other few wobbles we've had with Greece and indeed with Italy over the years, and including 2017 when the lead up to Macron's eventual success, there was a little lift in in French yields, which is basically what we're seeing a replica of. We're right up to those sort of levels, about 80 basis points, 75 to 80 basis points over Germany. So we're elevated from the pre-announcement of Macron June 7th, when it was sort of just below 50 over Germany. It's now up to just below 80 over Germany. So a substantial uplift. And we've seen other things go out like Italy as well, but nowhere near as much. This is really French yields actually haven't really moved. It is that yields in Germany in particular have dropped. So it puts the focus onto France. This is a short-term problem. We're about to find out the excess deficit procedure possibly from the European Union on France's parlous fiscal state, and I don't think that the politics are going to make that any easier up till July 7th, second round results. So the pressure is on France. It's on its extra cost perhaps on financing, but it's not panic, and that's a clear thing to say. This is a wobble, not a crisis.
Yeah. So Lionel, Le Pen has not published a detailed policy program, as I understand it. Is that right? What do we think the National Rally would actually do if they have let's say not a hung parliament, maybe a soft majority, but not the absolute mandate that she's been demanding?
So as you both have said, this is a very different party than the one her father led. Even it's a different party to what she led, because in 2017 she was proposing Frexit and then she dropped it. And then in 2022, she was really painted as the party of Putin sympathy, and that's what kind of lost her the election against Macron. And she's managed to drop every time the most toxic policies. So what is she proposing today? Honestly, her party is changing position by the day. It's not even by the year. In her 2022 campaign, there were a lot of fiscal giveaways. I mean, she's known as the far-right party on immigration and security, but economically, she is still very left-wing, including being opposed to Macron's pension reform. And a few days ago, again, to give this aura of normalization, Bardella said, oh, well, actually, that will come later. We're going to put all that stuff. Let's see what happens. We are inheriting a terrible budget situation, so we'll see what we can do. That's been the message. And very recently, one of the proposals that did survive, which was a VAT cut to about 5.5% on certain goods, including energy, which it would cost in the tens of billions, is now being walked back. So I think the problem really is ambiguity. I mean, really, it's day by day. The real question is, when they come in, how will markets react? Will they be able to even do what they're saying they would do off the bat, which would include, again, VAT cuts, which are not funded, and a rollback of Macron's most recent pension reform, which again would be costly. So the real problem or success, let's say, is ambiguity. It's a total lack of clarity on the program, because they are in this to win it, and they figure that if they just say nothing and look governable, they can win this and sail through to 2027 presidential elections.
But as Marcus says, there's not a lot of room in the French budget, given deficit levels and given the European Commission's, truncheon that it could potentially wield for a national.
Well, he's just wielded actually, as we speak. The Commission has recommended opening this excessive deficit procedure, which sounds very tough, but the reality is that it will require whoever's in power. There's 7 countries, including Italy and France, are the big 2, who have been recommended to go forward to this sin bin of excessive deficit procedures, which means they have to present the 2025 budget heavily scrutinized, more likely October, probably more like into November. The Commission will come back and say, no, we want a ratchet of your deficit to GDP by tightening by about at least 0.5% per year. So for instance, France is at 5.5 in 2023. Going forward to this year is likely to be down a little bit, but let's say they're going to want 4.8, 4.7 or something for 2025.
Yeah.
That's going to be very difficult even for Macron, who was recommending 20 billion euros of cuts, which are going to be vetoed clearly by any National Rally prime minister. And how, as you're talking about VAT cuts, I mean, forget about it. I mean, these things are going to fall foul of Brussels. Whether or not politically that can get moved around, sort of depends on how aggressive Italy are. Slightly stronger GDP, slightly better deficit program, their overall worse debt. So there's a lot of politics to go in here. This will be basically any incoming French government has got a straightforward problem. Day one, they've got to get their budget for 2025 within Brussels or close to. So yeah, welcome to gridlock.
I mean, could we argue, Lionel, that there are sort of two big constraints that would operate on a Le Pen-led or Bardella-led government? One being, as Marcus just outlaid, the Commission and the strictures put on by Europe, and the other being the French Constitution, because Macron could, if I'm understanding it correctly, every year dissolve Parliament if he wanted to. Doesn't he? He gets to play that card once a year. So they would presumably couldn't do anything too outrageous, or Macron would say, let's go to the polls again.
Yeah, but that's once a year, which means that we still have a year to go before he can play that card again. So I'm not sure about that. I think, as Marcus was saying, you need a budget. And that is why I think Macron, everyone's been wondering, why did he do it? Well, I think Macron increasingly is looking saner by the day, even though initially I did think there was something wrong with his sanity. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to find these 20 billion in cuts, and he's made it someone else's problem. And so now we're going to have what's called a cohabitation between whoever heads the government and the president. So I think he is still there. Macron is still in the game. And it could even be a three-way cohabitation if the second biggest party is on the left. So to Marcus's point,
it's so much fun to come.
It's going to be chaos, and it is going to be constrained by the market. It is going to be constrained by the public finances, and in a way, we're already getting ready for that. Like that's why Bardella is saying, "Give me an absolute majority," because I can already tell I'm going to fail if I don't. Right? Everyone is already preparing their narrative for why the next 2 years are painful, and why the real victory has to be the presidency in 2027.
And we saw with the markets, we talked about the markets reacting immediately. One of the most striking things after Brexit was to see the French exchange overtake UK exchanges. That was just reversed last week. I think we have a chart on that showing that the UK regained its #1 position.
It's in dollars, and I love these things because it's great copy. But you think, does anyone really care? I mean, we all know the price of LVMH is what's driven up France, and indeed it's just the sort of falling of French banks because of perhaps an overreaction. But yeah, look at that crossover. But I mean, it doesn't really tell me much because it's denominated in dollars, and really the price of dollars to either euro or sterling would move this. But it's just
the direction of travel also matters,
symbolism.
right?
It is symbolism. You're absolutely right. Yeah. It's another stick to beat Macron or whoever it may be over the head with. But at the same time, I'm fascinated by, do you imagine if National Rally doesn't get a majority, therefore won't accept a prime ministership, then Macron has to choose from somewhere else. That could be, it could be fantastically exciting.
Is that within the realm of possibility, Lionel, within a 2-round voting system? I mean, we should remind people listening that the European parliamentary elections were, the vote for that was under a proportional representation system. And as you've explained, this is a 2-round voting system. So it's a slightly different dynamic.
Yeah, but it's still going to depend on who comes first. And right now, again, it's a very complicated thing to project and poll, but let's just stick with what we can see right now, which is the top 2 parties are either going to be on the far right or this left-wing alliance that runs from the far left, the Social Democrats. The left looks by the way, it's so ideologically stretched that I don't even think this left alliance is going to survive past the election. So for now, I think markets are right. They have to focus on the most likely outcome, which is a very good result for the RN, and also some kind of second round shenanigans where there's a lot of so-called Republican in the French sense, where everybody rallies around to try and reduce that score for the RN. So I think markets kind of have it right for now.
Are you seeing business speaking up at all and trying to sort of sway opinion or get a hearing from either of these leading blocs?
No, I think this is the Brexit echo. The vibe is very much 2016 at the moment. The thing that's missing, though, is a Singapore-on-Thames crowd. Like no one is out there at the same time saying we're going to build a new shining city on the hill. There's none of that. But one very punchy position from billionaire Vincent Bolloré was to actually try and unite the right, actually try and get the far right with Le Pen to ally with the centre right Républicain. This is what we all saw on our screens a week ago, with the party banging on the door, trying to turf out the head of their party, who was locked himself in the office. I mean, the last person he spoke to was a media billionaire. So clearly, some people are trying to kind of stir things up. But what I hear is really on the sidelines, a lot of nervousness, a lot of kind of gloom, and a real fear of sticking their heads above the parapet, which I hope, as we get closer, and you look at the policies, I hope that'll change. But for now, it's...
Lionel, can you not get Jamie Dimon back again? Because he seems to work wonders every time Macron wants to wave a look at us, we're fabulous. Bring Jamie back.
It's an invitation officially issued.
I think the chart.
Oh
you
no,
showed about
we're going to knight him.
market,
Sorry, the UK have got trumped you. They're going to make him a knight of the realm.
The stock market chart, I think, is very telling. I think the Choose France summit is going to be called Unchoose France for the time being.
I want to move on shortly to talk about the UK election and Nigel Farage, but just one question before we do. I'm interested in your thoughts on what the impact will be for the broader EU agenda, areas like the green transition, support for Ukraine, the competitiveness agenda. How big would a national rally run government be for Europe?
So again, just with the caveat that there's a lot that's ambiguous and unclear, that's up in the air right now. I think on things like finances, the budget, certain aspects of the EU single market, like energy, I think the RN wants to show that it can fight and take the fight to Brussels. So I do anticipate, even if it's rhetorical, a lot of kind of banging the fist on the table and trying to find allies to kind of get those victories. On the flip side, I think on defense, as I said, I was just at this arms show. I mean, clearly now the rhetoric today is a complete reversal. Now Bardella is talking about giving support to Ukraine and not distancing France from NATO at a time when Russia is a threat. And on things like AI and tech, I think the Macronian view of strategic autonomy and sovereignty will carry through. And who knows, right? I mean, if we all agree that public finances are an inevitability, whoever's in power, maybe EU fiscal integration in some areas like defense may not seem so toxic even to a far-right government. So I think for now, there's clearly a bit of conflict to come, but also maybe some continuity.
Yeah, no, that sounds right. And I mean, clearly the French Constitution gives the president primacy on foreign and defense policy, but that doesn't mean that a government wouldn't be able to throw a lot of spanner in the works if it wanted to. So from one election to another where we are likely to see a centrist government result, but Nigel Farage's entry into the UK race certainly made it more interesting. I think that they're not quite so clear that it affects what happens after the election. Maybe let's talk about, what Farage is up to. I mean, one thing we do know about Farage is that he tends to get very far on his policies against immigration. I think we have a clip showing when he launched his manifesto. He actually didn't call it a manifesto, it's a contract. And that was one of the key sort of moments and centerpieces of that offering is railing against the Tory record on immigration. I think we have a clip on that.
I've said from the start, this should be the immigration election. I have no doubt about that. I think the population explosion, the impact that it's had on people's lives, is the dominant issue. How can you discuss NHS waiting lists without discussing the fact that the population has risen by 6 million people since David Cameron came to power back in 2010? How can you talk about a shortage of housing where we need to build one new dwelling every 2 minutes just to cope with current levels of net migration. How can you talk about any of these things? So we believe this is what we should be talking about. But of course, the others would rather not discuss it. The Conservatives are attempting, for a fifth manifesto in a row, to tell us they'll reduce the numbers.
So, Marcus, we know the Conservatives haven't reduced the numbers. Net immigration has gone up quite dramatically, though not from the EU after Brexit. Polls are putting reform at a record high level, 13 to 14%. Some of that may be coming down, but the impact so far seems to be to just kind of hit at that giant bruise that is the Conservative Party. What do you think? What's the influence of Nigel Farage entering? Is it short term? Is it long term? Have we seen peak Farage? What do you think?
It's the sort of coup de grace in the sense that this is about Labour, and it's about, after 14 years of Conservative rule, there is, it's not completely, there have been coalitions and various other different things, but nonetheless, they're getting, blamed fair and square for the last 14 years of inaction on several fronts. And actually, the shift has been much more to legal immigration as opposed to illegal, which they have actually shown some improvement on, though that's patchy. Certainly, that the legal migration has jumped, particularly from the previous sort of Commonwealth countries, as opposed to the EU. But I mean, Farage is going to take away and perhaps cause 50 or 60 or more seats for Conservatives to lose, but they will not win them. Again, we have a first past the post system here, and it will just enable Labour and particularly Liberal Democrats to take seats off the Conservatives. So, whilst he makes obviously a very loud and splashy claim, this is he's right also to say that he's fighting now to be who will be the leader of the opposition in 5 years' time. He's fighting a meeting again. So really this is Labour's Ming Vaz election. They've done nothing wrong. The policy of the people behind the electoral campaign is on sort of second to none, and let's hope that passes through into an obvious Labour government from July the 4th. We're going to have a very difficult opposition benches. I mean, the trouble is they're going to have huge amounts of Labour MPs on one side. On the other side, we're going to have probably not enough seats to fill the spaces, and it's going to be difficult to work out, between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, who's going to actually voice a credible opposition to Labour. But certainly, I don't think it's going to be about immigration this election. It's not about policy or manifestos. It's about change. I think the government, is already written in. It's going to be Labour, and reform has done more damage to the Conservative Party than anything else. And it's who takes over from the Rishi Sunak. He's clearly counting down the days until his end of his political career. He may stay on as an MP, but I think that will be him done. Will we bring Boris back? Will we be seeing Nigel Farage coming in as taking a reverse takeover of the Conservative Party, or indeed will it be someone of the characters we know from the sort of semi-front bench, Kemi Badenoch, Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat, who will come in? That's going to be sort of in the weeds, I guess, for the summer. But this is not about the decision that Rishi Sunak made, which Macron has mirrored perhaps, but for sure. Rishi Sunak's decision was a devil's choice of lose now and gain some honour from it, or try and string it out to the back end of the year and maybe get some gains. But it's proven a bad decision.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Boris, who I noticed that he's entered the fray from his vacation spot of Sardinia, writing or sending letters or video clips or whatever it was in support of certain MPs. Does that make any difference? And are you surprised that the gap between Labour and Tories, has, if anything, widened and not narrowed since that election was called? We would have expected it to narrow, wouldn't we?
We are seeing some Labour support drop a little bit. That's inevitable, but it's at the same time the Tories are dropping as well, and that's because the Liberal Democrat voted share looks like it's rising. They're actually probably to the left of Labour, certainly in what you would expect from what Starmer said. The Liberal Democrat policies are certainly agreeing 100% on anything with Labour. They're purely focusing on throwing rocks at the Tories. That's worked very well for them. And reform, obviously, as we mentioned, is going to have taken, perhaps enough to shift some votes and seats, therefore, the Liberal Democrats' way, and Labour as well. So, I mean, we've seen a very solid campaign for Labour. They've not done anything wrong. They're really not saying very much. The Tory campaign started badly. to recover some poise. They are definitely making some points here on tax. They've got Starmer to admit that he won't be doing things on the capital gains tax on primary residents. It's an umming about council tax bans, which is yet to really be very clear. But certainly they've pinned down Labour on tax. That's been quite important. But it's not giving any votes towards the Tories. So I think we may have seen peak Liberal Democrat. We may have seen peak Reform here, and we'll see the Tory share drift up, and probably in seats some of these big polls are showing horrendous losses. I don't think it's going to be as bad as that. Nonetheless, we are not talking about 200 down from 360.
No, as we were a few weeks ago.
100, 150 at best.
And the clip focused on immigration, as you rightly say, that's maybe not foremost in voters' minds now. It does tend to come up and become a political hot potato at various points. If we imagine that we then have a Labour government and a National Rally-led government in France, I'm just wondering how those talks will go, because one of Labour's sort of offers to voters is that while it is not proposing to rejoin the EU, it's not proposing to rejoin the single market, it's not proposing a second referendum, it is proposing to improve on existing relations, which include trade relations, but especially on immigration. And Lionel, do you see those conversations going very well with Prime Minister Bardella?
Well, history suggests that the centre right and the far right have actually tried to reach out to the UK, right, and the UK Conservatives. I think Le Pen even proposed a UK-France defence treaty revival. There already exists a defence treaty, but it hasn't really gone places. So actually, the French far right has made overtures to the UK since Brexit. And obviously immigration is a top issue in the French campaign. However, I mean, I think bottom line is the real UK offer is going to be on defence. So in terms of defence and security, let's see how the rest of Europe and France wish to kind of get closer on that topic. I would also suggest that borders, when it comes to the far right, how can I put it? Borders want to be protected, and borders are national. So let's say border protectionism does not travel well. So there may continue to be exactly the same fights that we've seen up until now, with even fewer constructive solutions.
Yeah, I mean, you could see a Starmer forging a very close relationship with Macron. You've seen some warmth between them already, but then again, we have a weakened Macron. So it would seem to complicate UK-French relations, which have already become more complicated in recent years.
I would think that the one thing is that Starmer is not Boris, and he's not someone related to Boris, and therefore there might be some little bit more prochement with Brussels. I don't think Brussels wants anything to do with the UK, and I think Starmer knows this is the third rail for him to go anywhere near it for the next 5 years at least. So I don't think we're going to get any sort of great big treaty. There might be some little noodly bits which make some sense. As Lionel was saying, defence is clearly the one big thing that UK has to offer Europe. And maybe we get something in return for that, or whatever it may be. But financial services will be the key thing. I think that certainly that Starmer could do something on. But I just think that the interesting thing is that it's not been about Europe, the UK campaign at all. And I'm sure the French campaign will be nothing to do with the UK either. So these are very much domestic, situations. But we've all got to get on a little bit better. I think that's probably coming down the pipe. But certainly, I think the one thing I would say is that Macron is a character. Clearly, Bardella is a character. Le Pen is. Starmer isn't. And the one thing he's going to have in the next 5 years is that Rishi Sunak isn't a character. We've seen that very clearly. I don't think Ed Davey's ever going to get on the circle either. So Farage and indeed Boris are people who are not going to go away in the UK political scene, and they are going to be much more prominent as the alternative to perhaps a dull, careful Starmer. So, with French politics getting more exciting, perhaps we are, in theory, getting more dull in the UK, but I wonder how long that lasts for.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that speaks to also in an age where populist parties, are generally seeming to do very well. I know that the center still held in the European Parliament, but we saw surges in populist nationalist parties. These strong personalities, the charismatic, say whatever the public wants to hear politician tends to do, fairly well. I guess I think we've almost run out of time. So just maybe a final word from each of you on what you think the primary kind of impact of the election will be on economic growth.
Lionel, I'll let you get that one first. No, definitely you first. I want to.
I think
question.
It is difficult. I think the common thread between the UK and the France elections are that clearly we're in a world that is socially conservative and fiscally liberal, right? That's the big step change. We had the QE era, which in a way I think gave us both Brexit and the European response of Macron. So two different responses to a similar problem. And I think now it seems like that people want change, real change. And I think that if you look at the French suggestions, there's a lot of fiscal spending or desired fiscal spending. So that might be one common thread.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the UK economy is actually in much better shape than a lot of media publicity has had it up till recently. I think UK growth is going to get close to 1%, possibly higher. Interest rates should at some point come down. And I think there's some wiggle room on the fiscal stuff, mucking around with stuff at the Bank of England. So I don't think Labour's inheriting a bad growth outlook. I think some of the publicity from the French sort of chaos is probably too strong a word, but certainly unsettling, is probably going to help UK a bit relatively. The trouble for me on France is I look at the political outcomes and I can't see they can do very much at all in reducing their deficit, and very much therefore at all on boosting growth, which is definitely substandard. So the only hope that France has is a general tide lifts all boats from European Central Bank interest rate cuts. That's going to come only if the Fed cuts. So all in all, I think France is trapped in a low growth scenario, which, let's face it, the UK is as well. There's a minuscule little bit more light perhaps shining on the UK, which may make marginal differences for the UK, slightly outperforming France. But this is in the weeds.
So a sobering note to finish on for today. Marcus Ashworth and Lionel Laurent, thank you so much for chatting. This has been great, and speak soon.